Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
And then they began to call his TTF outfits leotards. And that's how we get leotards. And before you ask, did he capitalize on that? No, the man died at 32 of smallpox. It's sad. All right. So next. Hi, my name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? Hello, and welcome to another episode of How Did That Happen? This week, we are discussing tools that are named after people. So come along for the ride this week as I ask, tools that are named after people. How did that happen? All right. Thanks for coming back for another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. We are back here for episode 37, and this one is about tools named after people. This episode initially started with the idea of just trying to figure out why the Phillips head screwdriver was what it was, how we got that, how it became so dominant, and then I realized that there was a version that in Canada they did it differently, and that led me to just down this whole rabbit hole of like tools that are actually named after people, and we find out some what I think are some pretty interesting things. A lot of this stuff blew my mind, definitely, and so that's what's coming up. Before we get into that, let's see, what am I reading right now? I'm still reading Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. Still a really good book. I've also picked up another one. Like I said, I've said before, I'm kind of experimenting, and I guess not kind of. I meditate, from time to time, and that's from time to time. It's pretty much every day, every morning, before I get up and go to work. And so I've been trying to kind of tap into some Eastern ideas of like spiritualism, just to try to add to my regiment of daily living. And so I'm reading about. This book is called, I think it's called It's Not As Hard As You Think, and it's about implementing your Buddhist principles into a Western life. If you listen to this podcast regularly, I believe I mentioned a book a few episodes ago. That's almost the exact same thing. It's called what is it called? What's it called? Buddhist Standard Time, I believe was the name of that book. And that was about the same thing with a doctor or I'm not sure it's a doctor. The author was trying to just show you easy ways where you could put like meditating and thoughts about the universe and time into your daily life and kind of help you kind of get you out of the rat race. But yeah, that's what's on my brain these days, is trying to slow it down. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm not going to bore you guys with too much more of that. I know you guys came to find out how some things happened. So without further ado, here's the episode. A screw is defined as an inclined plane that spirals around a central shaft. They have existed for thousands of years. They were first thought to be used to irrigate the hanging flower gardens of Babylon, which is one of the ancient 7 wonders of the world. If this is true, then that happened around the 7th or 6th century BC, because there is no actual evidence that those hanging flower gardens ever actually existed. So the first actual evidence that we do have of screws being used comes from Egypt, and they used them in the 3rd century in the form of the Archimedes screw, which were actual water pumps. They weren't they're not like what we use screws for now, but it was the screw technology. The screws were used to lift water from the Nile, and so they were also used in presses to make olive oil or wine, and they were not, like I said, not used as fasteners the way that we do now. They weren't used that way until about the 1400s. And so they were initially used to hold medieval jousting armor together and early guns. Early guns had screws in them The earliest screwdrivers were made to service that armor, like I said, the jousting armor and the weapons, and they were called things like screw turners, right? Turn screws, great names. Glad those didn't catch on. They were usually custom made and not a common occurrence around the house because they were only for jousting equipment. So if you're not a jouster, if you don't know a jouster, if you're not an aspiring jouster, you probably don't have any turn screws, right? Any screw turners in your drawers at home at this time. So jousting goes out of favor not long after King Henry II catches one in the eye. We talked about him last week for a different reason. We talked about how sad his lineage is because this guy dies, and then his 17-year-old son takes over. He dies, and then his 10-year-old son takes over. And didn't really look up what I think he died too. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not sure though. I'm not gonna wish death on a 500-year-old fourth grader, but I think he may have died too. Well, we know he's dead for sure now because if he's not, that'd be in the news. Let's see here. So yeah, goes out. The jousting goes out of favor, like I said, around that time. So that kind of takes away the need for jousting screws and those screw turners. And so the use for screws had to shift. Cue the Wyatt brothers. And now we have screws, 1700s forward. So in 1760, the Wyatt brothers created a screw-making machine that could mass produce screws. And this is what laid the foundation for the screw market today. The initial screws came in two types. They either had the slot facing upright or down. That's all you get, right? The slot facing up was for a flat-headed screwdriver, but the one facing down would have to be opened with a wrench. You've seen those. It's actually, you'd have to, like an open mouth wrench you'd have to use to, get those open. And so the flathead screwdriver was very common. So common, in fact, that when people tried to make other types of screwdrivers in the 1800s, it would be hard to get them to actually switch over, which kind of makes me think of when we talked about toilet paper and how hard it was for people to want to stop wiping their butts with corn cobs, basically. It's something you just get stuck in your ways, I guess. But yeah, back to these turn screws. There had been a few patents for other shapes of screwdrivers, but either because everyone already had a flathead screwdriver or because production problems, nothing really ever took off until we get to a man named P.L. Robertson. P.L. And the L stands for limb burner, if you're wondering. If anybody's wondering, I looked it up. It's limb burner. He was born in Haldimand County, Ontario in 1879, and he was a Canadian inventor and author. Guy wrote a book too. The land of Haldimand County, a little info if you're wondering, it was originally inhabited by a group of Native Americans who were part of the Six Nations. I guess that's like a conglomerate of some sort. And they had they gave the land to England in a contract in 1844. And, just from my little history of Native Americans, I'm sure that worked out for them very well. But the Peter Robertson, he did a lot of tinkering and even patented a version of the corkscrew. So we have him to thank for that as well. He created a device that he sold on the road, and it was called the 20th Century Wrench Brace, which, we got to do better with the names, which he hailed as the greatest tool on earth. The 20th Century Wrench Brace. Yeah, greatest tool. The tool could be used as a monkey wrench, a brace, a bench vise, not a bench. Let me take that back. I didn't see the comma. You couldn't just sit on it, but a bench vise, screwdriver, and a rivet maker. That's a lot of options. I guess that's why he's gunning for the greatest tool on earth. This was a fad during that era, and there were many actual multi-tools who were being marketed as such. During this time, he was also selling and demonstrating a spring-loaded screwdriver, and one time while he was doing this, the flat blade slipped out and cut his hand. So while doing this is what compelled him to make a different type of screwdriver that wouldn't cam out, as people say in the biz. He created the square-shaped screwdriver that is known as the Robertson head. I'm not sure what they actually call it. Robertson screw. He wasn't actually the first person to create this version of a screw. The first guy to patent a square socket actually was a man by the name of Alan Cummings in 1875. And old P.L. Robertson was only 4 years old at the time. So, he's just the guy that made it famous. Just putting it out there. But the Robertson screws were originally used for the Model T Ford. But when Henry Ford asked him for exclusive rights to use and manufacture the screws in the U.S., Robertson was like, "Nah, I'm not with that." But there was a man named Henry Phillips who felt differently. He was like, I'm kind of with that. And that's what leads us to the beginning of the Phillips head screwdriver. The story of the Phillips head screwdriver actually starts in Birmingham, England, with a man named John Frierson. He was a British inventor, engineer, and manufacturer. All these guys had like super commas with all the stuff they did. Like, I don't have that many stuff. If you were to describe me, I don't do that much, but these guys have like 3 different things that they all did. He patented hooks and eyes for women's skirts, and he exhibited this invention at the Great Exhibition of 1851. And Frierson later designed a cruciform screw head similar to what the Phillips head is today, basically, but with a more pointed kind of 75-degree shape. So in July 1857, he was granted a British patent for this idea, and he repatented it in Britain in the 1870s. So it's just they're kind of the same way what I said, with the other guy. There's no real connection to the Phillips as far as the actual one, but it's like this wasn't the first technology of its sort. This guy wasn't he wasn't inventing the wheel. He was basically reinventing the wheel. Just kind of want to give people their credit where it's due. And so the person who created the Phillips head screwdriver was not named Phillips at all, and that is, we're going to talk about a different person right now who is also not named Phillips, who had a lot to do with making a Phillips head. So this guy's name was John Thomson, and he was from Portland, Oregon. And old Thomson applied for a patent in 1932 with an innovative cruciform groove and a matching screwdriver. So we've moved past the turn screw phase of our naming. And for reasons that I couldn't find, he really had trouble kind of putting these on the market and selling them. Every place that I read just said he failed at it. They just really wanted to put him down without any sort of constructive criticism. But all they said was he wasn't good at it. I found one article that said the manufacturers were afraid that the stamp on the screw, the cross symbol, would destroy the screw head in some way, like with the torque or something like that. It just wasn't that they didn't think it would hold. But that's about all I found. But so what would happen? What he ended up doing was he later sold the design to a man named, here we go, wait for it, Henry F. Phillips. There we go. That's it. That's how we got there, right? That's how we get the Phillips head. And the F stands for Frank, if anybody was wondering. But it was Phillips who then formed a new company, improved the design, and then worked to get the drive system to become the standard in numerous industries. I think we talked about one a little bit earlier with old Henry Ford. And so Thomson would die about 5 years after he sold his screw technology. And like we said, one of the first companies to buy and use the Phillips head screw was General Motors. They first used it on the 1936 Cadillac. 85% of screw manufacturing companies had a license to produce the Phillips screw recessed design by 1940. So by 1940, they had just taken over the U.S. market, and which is why you see them a lot, pretty much everywhere. And so there are evidently like 10 different types of screwdrivers. And I found that out when I was looking at all this stuff up. I had no idea there were this many. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to list off just a few. Not going to define them, just so you know some things that I know, how many different types of screwdrivers there are. So we got Phillips, we got insulated, we got torque. You just add screwdriver at the end of all these words. Flathead, tri-wing, posi-drive, impact, triangle, magnetic. I mean, it keeps going. Ratchet. I'm just going to stop right there. All those are actual. And now I will do the same thing for screws because there's just so many different types of screws. So we got cap, we got wood, we got machine, we got self-tapping, we got drywall, we got set, and even we got double-ended. And so we're at a part in the episode where I thought I didn't know I was going to do this until I started looking into it, because you never know what you're going to find. But I realized that there are so many other named like tools and objects that are named for people that I just had no idea that they were named for people. Sometimes it's pretty obvious, sometimes it's not. And so I have a few that I'm gonna actually kind of just tell you some backstories for. That's why the original name for this episode was going to be like, Phillips head screwdriver, or names of screwdrivers. But then it really kind of just, I realized, like I said, there's so many other different things that have names that are actual people and not just created names for products. And so we have the first one up. We have is the Collins axe. And so Samuel Watkins Collins founded the Collins Company with his brother and their cousin in 1826. And they started with making axes, a tool that every pioneer, logger, and builder needed during that time. And by 1859, Collins employed 350 people and produced 2,000 tools daily, having added picks, sledgehammers, and sugarcane cutting knives, machetes, and more. And this is pretty wild. At one point, the company produced 80% of the world's machetes. 80% of the world's machetes. So if you're ever watching some old movie that's, showing people like cutting through the bush of whatever in like 1860 or whatever, and the dude's got a machete, more than likely made by the Collins Company. Just interesting. Collins died in 1871, and the company of his name continued at the same site until 1966. And they sold and then moved again. And Collins Axe is now a brand for this Mexican company that does tools and also sells a Collins Axe. But that is how the Collins Axe happened. He came from a guy named Collins. So then we have the Allen wrench. The Allen wrench, fitting snugly into the indentation on a screw or bolt, was the trademarked invention of William G. Allen in 1910. And he also had a patent that awarded to a method of manufacturing the screw head as well. Much like Collins, this was originally a Connecticut company named after the founder. He then moved on. The company was sold, acquired several times, and is now just a brand name that's manufactured in Asia. Starting to see a kind of a pattern here. This next one's interesting because there's multiple theories on how it actually got its name, and it is called the Bastard File. And so the first theory of the Bastard File is that in the early 14th century, the Duke of Northumberland would abuse tenants of his farms who were late paying, and he would do this by torturing their wives. And during this time, he invented a number of tools to do so, and to enforce this late payment. And one of those tools was commonly known as the Bastard File. And so the second theory is in heraldry, coat of arms belonging to people born outside of wedlock, also known as quote-unquote bastards, bore a device known as the Bos Sinister, a diagonal stripe that ran from the top right of the crest to the bottom left. This is the same direction that the teeth of a single cut file from the Bastard File run in. So different ideas. I just thought the name itself, I was like, I have to kind of figure out why they thought to continue calling something Bastard File even this far in. And so the next one really interested me because it is just something that you just don't think about when you think about everyday products. To me, so diesel engines are named after a guy named Diesel. I mean, his last name's Diesel, but literally, they're named after a man named Rudolf Diesel, and he was born in Paris in 1858 to Bavarian immigrants. And it says he was given away as a child and then returned, which is just like, what? And then he died under mysterious circumstances surrounding World War I. And we'll kind of get into that for a second, because this guy had a crazy life. I mean, who gets given away and then returned? But we're going to get into his death. So he boarded a ship called the SS Dresden, and before he went missing, that was the last place he was seen, basically. And his body was later recovered from the water. So basically, they think he was thrown overboard. Some people say he committed suicide. Others say he was murdered by the German government. That just took a turn. And because he wouldn't give them the exclusive rights to his diesel technology. And this actually kind of makes the most sense because, not to get into conspiracy theories, but Rudolph Diesel was on the way to talk to the British Royal Navy about letting them use his brand new diesel technology. You know what I mean? And so the German government was probably like, we don't really like that idea, and then, they find you in the ocean, All the history of diesel engines, man, it gets deep. Where's that movie at on Amazon? I'd watch that. And so let's see. I think I have one more that I'm gonna say, the actual history, but I'm gonna run through a couple just the names and just let you know that those are also people's names. And so like the Derringer pistol or whatever, made by a guy named Henry Derringer. Braille, like the touching the little dots for people who can't see. It's actually made by a guy named Louis Braille. Never knew, right? Bowler hats, made by a guy named William Bowler. I have no idea. And so I just thought I'd run those two, but there's one more that I'm gonna lay out here, and that is the Bowie knife. The Bowie knife. Heard of it? All people I still do know people that think Bowie knives are cool, and they don't. They look pretty cool, but there's nothing like amazing to me about them. But when you learn the story behind what makes a Bowie knife, that is probably what actually made them what they are today. So, on September 19th, 1827, around midday, two men, one by the name of Samuel Wells III and the other Dr. Thomas Maddox, they met for a duel on a sandbar just outside Natchez, Mississippi. Always thought Natchez is one of the coolest words and names town ever. Just Natchez. It's cool. It's fun to say. All right. So basically, one thing led to another, and the duel turned into a brawl, as duels tend to do. And so Jim Bowie, I believe his name is, was there backing up one of his boys. I believe it was Samuel Wells. I'm not sure. But I think it was that because like they all came, it was a duel where they all came with like their backups basically. So it's like y'all kind of expected this to not just be a duel, but that's a whole different story. So Bowie gets shot. He gets stabbed a couple times on both of those. He survives, right? He kills some people, and people die. Multiple people die in this sandbar brawl. But except for he lives, and so because his super savage hero story gets spread like wildfire through the U.S. and the U.K. of like this guy that fought all these dudes and like all with this one, not with this one knife. They shot people too, but it was like the way he was like, I guess just being like just this. I don't know, like when you read the accounts, it's graphic, and it is like a fight, but I mean. I don't know. Like I thought about reading it on here, but I was just like, that's not interesting. It's because I could barely keep because I don't know. Like I don't know why it would become such a story, but it did. And so basically, Bowie would go on to marry and lose his whole family to cholera because back then stuff like that was just happening. And then he lost his life in the Battle of Alamo. But after his death, a man named James Black from Hackensack, New Jersey, began to market and sell Bowie knives to pioneers who were moving out to settle the West. And so that, all based off the story of the guy who fought all these people in a brawl and beat everybody, and then they killed him and stuff, and, all based off that story. And so that is like the lore. If you know anybody, it's a little bit different now, but when I grew up, I knew people who's like grandpas and stuff and had Bowie knives, and and this was back when the artist was still alive, the Bowie guy, and I was just like, is there a connection? Like, did he market knives in the 80s? I don't know. But yeah, so that's the last one about the actual let's see, Tool's name for people. And that is how Tool's name for people happened. And now it's time for the roundup. And we're going to round it up. The first evidence of the use of screws comes from the Egyptians, who used them to pump water from the Nile. They were used in jousting armor and early firearms. In 1760, the Wyatt brothers created a screw-making machine that could mass-produce screws. Robertson and Phillips create competing alternatives to the flathead screwdriver. Things I didn't know before. And now I know them. Never heard of these things. What are they? Alright, so things I didn't know before. And the first one, I mean both, let's see, I guess two of these are, I have two for this topic, for this segment, but they're basically in the same vein of with the different things that I didn't know were named for people, but these two just really blew my mind, like that I never just never think about that these are just that people are behind all of these things. So the leotard, the first one. The leotard is actually named for French acrobat Jules Leotard. When I saw that, like I wasn't even looking this up, and this is, I guess I'm gonna get into it. Like this stuff just, when you're doing this much research, you just see random stuff when you're diving into the internet. And this is literally one of those times when the research just brings up just random facts. And I was reading about the Allen wrench, right, on this website, and then I look up to the right side of the screen, and there's a picture of Jules Leotard. And they don't even mention, there's no context, just a picture. And then they don't even and I was reading and it just made me curious. Right. And so I was just like, okay, so I have to find out more about this guy. Right. And so basically he designed his own uniform for swinging on the trapeze. That's what he does. And it was a tight tailored fit. It was a TTF, And people saw it and they were impressed. They were like, oh, look at that TTF. He's tight tailored fit. And then they began to call his TTF outfits leotards. And that's how we get leotards. And before you ask, did he capitalize on that? No, the man died at 32 of smallpox. It's sad. All right. So next. Number 2, we get to Doc Martens, which I've always known. I've never had them. You look at them. I see people wearing them now. I wouldn't mind having a pair, but I mean, I never associated them, like I said, with an actual person. Okay, so it got dark at the end of the last one. This might get dark as well, just for a touch. We're going to touch the darkness. Doc Martens were made by a dude who was in the Nazi army. Some people probably know that. I didn't know that. Klaus Martin, before he was of Doc Marten fame, injured his ankle doing Nazi stuff during the war and decided that he needed better boots. So he designed the original Doc Martens himself and then tried to market them with no success until he went into business with a friend from school in 1947 once all that Nazi stuff died down. Literally, I guess. Looking at you, Adolf. So, yeah, that's I didn't know that. Neither one of those things I didn't know before. So that's what the segment's about. If you're new to the podcast, there's just, when I'm looking up all the stuff, I always find some things that I just didn't expect to find that are just like, whoa, how sometimes have nothing to do with the podcast or like the, whatever. It's just some stuff you just see when you're looking for facts and research. You're just like, oh, you learn. All right. That's it's been another episode of HDTH. I want to thank you guys for tuning in and pressing play. I appreciate it. Everybody who always comes by and tries to find out how things happen with me every week. I feel like we're finding out cool things. So yeah, let's do it all again next week.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.